Political season seems to never end in this country. We are just 6 months away from the 2024 presidential primary. And today, a challenge comes forward to try and keep former President Donald Trump, by far the Republican frontrunner in the field, off the ballot in the state of Minnesota. Now, we're not the first state to see this kind of challenge, but we are the first state to see it in court. And it has nothing to do with former President Trump's recent charges. This has to do with January 6th and the Constitution's 14th Amendment. To explain what all of that is, what all of that means, or if it means anything, let's go to John Croman. Hi, John.
Hey, Jana. Well, in Minnesota, you can sue directly to the state Supreme Court to challenge someone's qualifications to be on the ballot. So the legal fight will be whether the facts of January 6th match what the folks in Congress had in mind back when they passed the 14th Amendment following the Civil War. Typically, the Republican Party decides which Republican's name appears on the presidential ballot in Minnesota.
The rule is different, and the rule is that the political parties submit, in the case of the primary, a list of folks who they want to appear on their ballot, and in the case of the general election, they submit an individual for president and an individual for vice president who they certify is their nominee.
But Secretary of State Steve Simon is being sued by a group that says it would be an error to put former President Donald Trump's name on the 2024 ballot. They contend that he's disqualified by his actions leading up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
Section 3 says that anyone who swore an oath to support the Constitution but then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States is disqualified from public office unless and until 2/3 of both houses of Congress grants that person amnesty.
Ron Fine is legal director for Free Speech for the People, a national group making the case that the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution disqualifies the former president, whether or not he's charged or convicted with any crimes.
The vast majority of ex-Confederates who were covered by Section 3 were never charged with any crimes, let alone convicted of them.
Minnesota is uniquely situated for a case like this because a state law, Section 204B.44, allows people to petition directly to the state Supreme Court if they think the Secretary of State's office is about to or has already put the name of an unqualified person on the ballot. That's what happened to Representative Bob Barrett in 2016. The Supreme Court ruled he was disqualified because he no longer was a resident of his district.
The Minnesota Supreme Court will hand this off to a judge who then will accept facts, have a hearing, and then prepare findings, essentially, and then put that back in front of the Minnesota Supreme Court for their decision on the ultimate question in this case.
The Minnesota plaintiffs on this case include former Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson and former Secretary of State Joan Groh.
We don't take any position on the merits. I want to be very clear. This is up to the court to decide.
The current Secretary of State plans to remain on the sidelines.
We will be, in most respects, a bystander in this litigation, as presumably the plaintiffs who brought this lawsuit today and President Trump or his lawyers spar over what the facts are and what the law is. We take no position on the facts. We take no position on the ultimate legal conclusion about whether former President Trump is or is not entitled to be on the ballot.
Now, we reached out today to both the Republican Party of Minnesota and the Trump campaign, but have not received a response yet. This case, Jana, should move fairly quickly because the deadline for the parties to submit names for the March 5th presidential primary is January 2nd, and early voting begins in mid-January.
Now, John, I saw other states, namely, I think yesterday, Colorado, talking about this, but there's a difference. In our state, like you said, this is already basically in court, and these other states it's not?
Right. This group, this national group, petitioned directly to the Secretary of State in those other states. They petitioned to Steve Simon, too, and he said, no, I'm not going to get involved. You got to go through the courts, and in Minnesota, you can do that.
Interesting. All right. Thanks, John.